Where should I undress? She whispered. His reply changed her life forever. Emotional Wild West tale. The small town of Red Hollow sat quietly in the middle of the wide desert. Dusty roads ran between wooden buildings, and the wind often carried the dry smell of sand and horses through the streets. Most days in Red Hollow were slow and peaceful. The townspeople knew each other well, and nothing unusual happened very often. Near the edge of town stood a simple horse stable. It was not a large place, but it was clean and well cared for. The man who ran the stable was a quiet cowboy named Daniel Hayes. Daniel was known as a hard-working man. He spoke little, but he always treated people with kindness. Every morning he woke up early, fed the horses, cleaned the stalls, and helped travelers who passed through town. The horses trusted him, and the townspeople respected him. Unlike many cowboys, Daniel did not spend his nights at the noisy saloon. Instead, he preferred the calm of the stable and the open desert sky. One evening, the sun began to sink behind the far hills. The sky slowly turned orange and gold, and the air grew cooler. Daniel was brushing one of the horses when he noticed something unusual near the road. A young woman was walking slowly toward the town. Her steps were tired, and her clothes were covered with dust from a long journey. She carried a small worn bag, and her face looked pale from exhaustion. She stopped near the entrance of the stable and looked around as if she was unsure where to go. Daniel watched quietly for a moment. Travelers often came through Red Hollow, but something about this woman was different. She looked nervous, almost afraid of the town itself. The woman took a few steps closer, but hesitated again. Her eyes moved from building to building as if she expected someone to stop her. Daniel gently placed the brush down and walked toward her. "Good evening," he said in a calm voice. The woman looked slightly surprised when she heard him speak. For a moment, she seemed unsure she should answer. "Good evening," she replied softly. Up close, Daniel could see how tired she really was. Her hands were shaking slightly, and dark circles rested under her eyes. "Looks like you've had a long trip," Daniel said kindly. The woman nodded. "Yes, a very long one." Her voice carried a quiet sadness that Daniel could not ignore. "My name is Clara," she said after a moment. "Daniel," he replied. For a short while, neither of them spoke. The evening wind moved gently through the stable, and one of the horses softly stomped its hoof against the ground. Clara looked down at the dusty road. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said quietly. "I just arrived in town. I don't really know where I should go." Daniel understood what she meant. Red Hollow did have a small boarding house, but sometimes travelers arrived too late to find a room. He glanced toward the small guest room above the stable. It was a simple place he sometimes offered to tired travelers who needed rest. "There's a small room above the barn," Daniel said. "It isn't fancy, but it's clean. You're welcome to stay there tonight, if you need a place." Clara looked up quickly. Her eyes showed surprise, but also uncertainty. "Are you sure?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Of course." Clara held the strap of her small bag tightly. It was clear she was not used to trusting strangers. Still, she followed Daniel slowly toward the wooden stairs beside the stable. The guest room was simple. There was a small bed, a wooden chair, and a small window that looked out over the quiet desert. The last light of the sunset filled the room with warm orange color. Daniel placed a small lantern on the table. "You can rest here tonight," he said. "There's water by the door if you need it." Clara stepped inside the room carefully. For a moment, she simply stood there looking around. The place was quiet, safe. Daniel turned to leave so she could rest. But Clara suddenly spoke again. "Daniel," he stopped and looked back. Clara seemed nervous. She lowered her voice until it was almost a whisper. A question that had lived in her mind for many years slowly came out. "Where should I undress?" Her voice carried fear, as if she expected a difficult answer. Daniel looked surprised by the question. For a moment, he did not understand why she asked it. Then he realized something. The way she held her bag, the fear in her eyes, the way she waited for his response. Daniel's expression softened. But the answer he gave would soon become something Clara would never forget. Clara stood quietly inside the small room above the stable. The warm light from the lantern filled the wooden walls with a soft glow. Outside, The evening wind moved gently across the desert. Her question still hung in the air. "Where should I undress?" she had whispered. Daniel stood near the doorway. For a moment he did not answer, not because he was angry, but because he was surprised. The question sounded strange to him. Then he noticed something important. Clara was not asking with confidence. She was asking with fear. Her hands were holding the strap of her bag tightly. Her shoulders were stiff, and she looked down at the floor instead of at him. It was the kind of question someone asked when they expected something in return for kindness. Daniel suddenly understood. Clara had probably lived in places where help always came with a price. His voice became calm and gentle. "You don't have to worry about that," Daniel said softly. Clara slowly looked up. Daniel pointed toward the room. "This room is yours tonight. You can change, rest, or do whatever you need. I'll be downstairs at the stable." For a moment, Clara did not move. It was as if her mind could not understand what he had said. "You mean I can stay here?" she asked carefully. Daniel nodded. "Yes." "And that's all?" she asked again. "That's all," Daniel replied. There were no hidden words in his voice, no strange look in his eyes, only simple honesty. Clara felt something warm rise inside her chest. Relief, but also confusion. She had spent many years learning that kindness was often followed by demands. Her life had taught her to expect the worst from people. But Daniel's answer was different. He turned toward the door. "There's fresh water in the bucket," he said. "And if you're hungry, I can bring you some bread and soup from the kitchen." Clara blinked in surprise. "You would do that?" she asked. Daniel gave a small smile. "Traveling is hard. Everyone needs food and rest." Then he quietly stepped outside and closed the door behind him. The room became silent. Clara slowly sat on the edge of the small bed. For the first time in many days, her body relaxed. She looked around the room again. The wooden floor was clean. The small window showed the dark desert outside. Somewhere below, a horse gently moved in its stall. Everything felt peaceful. Clara placed her small bag on the chair and covered her face with her hands. A few quiet tears rolled down her cheeks. Not tears of sadness, but tears of relief. For the first time in a long time, someone had treated her with simple respect. Downstairs, Daniel returned to his work in the stable. He filled water buckets and checked the horses before the night grew colder. One of the horses, a brown mare named Willow, gently nudged his shoulder. Daniel smiled and patted her neck. "You're hungry too, huh?" he said softly. After finishing his work, Daniel walked toward the small kitchen beside the stable. He warmed some soup and placed it with a piece of bread on a small tray. A few minutes later, he climbed the wooden stairs again and knocked lightly on the door. "Clara," he called. The door opened slowly. Clara now looked cleaner and calmer. She had washed her face, and the fear in her eyes had softened a little. "I brought you some food," Daniel said, handing her the tray. Clara looked at it with surprise. "You didn't have to do this," she said. Daniel shrugged gently. "It's no trouble." Clara accepted the tray and stepped back into the room. "Thank you," she said quietly. Daniel nodded and began walking back down the stairs. But before he left, Clara spoke again. "Daniel." He turned around. "Yes." Clara hesitated, searching for the right words. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. It was an honest question. Daniel thought about it for a moment. Then he gave a simple answer. "Because someone once helped me when I needed it," he said. Clara watched him walk down the stairs and disappear into the stable. She stood there for a long moment, holding the tray of warm soup. His words stayed in her mind. Sometimes the smallest kindness could feel like the biggest gift. Clara did not know it yet. The sun slowly rose above the desert hills, spreading soft golden light across the small town. Birds chirped near the rooftops, and the cool morning air carried the gentle smell of hay and fresh earth. Inside the stable, Daniel Hayes had already started his daily work. He moved calmly between the stalls, feeding the horses and filling their water buckets. The animals greeted him with soft sounds, clearly comfortable with his presence. Daniel worked the same way every morning, steady, quiet, and patient. Above the stable, Clara Whitmore slowly opened her eyes. For a moment, she did not remember where she was. The wooden ceiling, the small window, and the warm blanket felt unfamiliar. But then the memory of the previous evening returned. The stable, the quiet room, and Daniel's unexpected kindness. Clara sat up slowly. Through the window, she could see the early sunlight shining over the wide desert. For the first time in many days, she had slept peacefully. She washed her face with the cool water in the bucket and carefully brushed the dust from her clothes. Her small bag still rested on the chair where she had left it. Clara took a deep breath. Then she walked downstairs. The wooden steps creaked softly as she entered the stable. Daniel was brushing a tall gray horse when he noticed her. "Good morning," he said kindly. Clara gave a small smile. "Good morning." For a moment she watched him work. He moved calmly and spoke gently to the horse as he brushed its coat. "You seem to know horses very well," Clara said. Daniel chuckled softly. "They've been my company for many years." The gray horse lifted its head and looked at Clara curiously. "This one is Silver," Daniel said. "He likes meeting new people." Clara carefully stepped closer and held out her hand. Silver sniffed her palm and then relaxed. Clara smiled. "He's beautiful." Daniel nodded. "He knows it too." For a short moment, the stable felt peaceful. Then Clara remembered something important. "Daniel," she said quietly, "I don't want to be a burden." Daniel paused and looked at her. "You're not a burden," he replied. "But I can work," Clara continued. "If there's anything I can do around here, I'd like to help." Daniel considered her words. The stable was small, but there were always tasks that needed attention. Cleaning stalls, organizing supplies, and caring for the horses. "Well," Daniel said, "if you're willing, you can help brush the horses and refill some water buckets." Clara's face brightened. "I would like that." Daniel handed her a soft brush. "Start with Willow," he said, pointing to a calm brown horse nearby. "She's very gentle." Clara approached Willow slowly. At first she felt nervous, but the horse stood quietly as she began brushing its coat. The simple task felt peaceful. As the morning passed, Clara helped with small chores around the stable. She cleaned the wooden floors, carried fresh water, and even helped organize some old supplies. Daniel noticed something important. Each hour, Clara looked more relaxed. The fear that had filled her eyes at night before slowly faded. Around midday, the town baker, Mrs. Harper, stopped by the stable with a basket of fresh bread. "Morning, Daniel," she said cheerfully. Then she noticed Clara. "Well, now, who do we have here?" Daniel introduced them. "This is Clara. She arrived yesterday." Mrs. Harper smiled warmly. "Anyone who helps Daniel with the horses is welcome in my book." She handed Clara a small loaf of warm bread. "Here," she said kindly, "fresh from the oven." Clara looked surprised. "Thank you," she said softly. As Mrs. Harper walked back toward town, Clara turned to Daniel. "Everyone here seems kind," she said. Daniel leaned against a wooden fence. "Red Hollow is a small place," he explained. "People look out for each other." Clara looked toward the town buildings in the distance. For the first time since arriving, she felt something new. Maybe this town could become more than just a stop in her long journey. Maybe it could become a place where she could begin again. As the afternoon sun warmed the desert, Clara continued helping around the stable. She even laughed once when Willow tried to nibble her sleeve. Daniel noticed a change. The tired traveler who had arrived the night before was slowly becoming someone stronger. But neither of them knew that the next few days in Red Hollow would bring an opportunity Clara never expected. The days in Red Hollow slowly turned into weeks. Each morning the desert sun rose over the wide hills, and the town woke up to the sounds of horses, wagons, and friendly voices. Life in the small town was simple, but it was full of quiet kindness. For Clara Whitmore, every day felt a little different from the life she had known before. She no longer woke up with fear in her chest. Instead, she woke up in a small room above the stable, where the sunlight came to the wooden window and the gentle sounds of horses filled the morning air. Downstairs, Daniel Hayes would already be working. Clara soon became a regular helper at the stable. She brushed the horses, cleaned the stalls, and carried water buckets with care. The work was not easy, but it made her feel useful. And slowly, the people of Red Hollow began to know her. Mrs. Harper at the bakery always greeted her with a warm smile. The blacksmith waved when she walked past his shop. Even the children who ran through the dusty streets would stop to watch her feed the horses. Clara was no longer a stranger. One warm afternoon, Daniel and Clara were repairing a broken fence near the stable. The sun was bright, but a soft wind moved through the desert grass. Clara carefully held a wooden board, while Daniel fixed it into place. "You've learned quickly," Daniel said with a small smile. Clara laughed softly. "I never thought I would learn so much about horses." "Well," Daniel said, "tighten the last nail. Horses teach patience." Clara looked across the open land. For a moment, she thought about the long journey that had brought her to this town. There had been many days of uncertainty and worry, but now things felt different, safer. "Daniel," she said quietly. He looked up. "Yes." "I've been thinking," Clara said. "I don't want to leave Red Hollow." Daniel rested his hammer on the fence. "You don't have to," he replied. Clara looked relieved. "I want to stay," she continued. "I want to work here and build a life here if that's possible." Daniel nodded slowly. "I think that would make a lot of people happy," he said. Clara smiled. Later that evening, the sky above Red Hollow turned soft pink and orange as the sun began to set. Clara stood outside the stable, watching the light fade across the desert. Daniel walked over and leaned against the wooden fence beside her. The town looked peaceful. After a moment, Clara spoke again. "Do you remember the first night I came here?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Yes." Clara took a deep breath. "That night, when I asked you that question," she said softly, Daniel understood what she meant. Clara looked at the horizon. "I asked because I thought your kindness would come at a price," she said honestly. Daniel stayed quiet. "But your answer surprised me," Clara continued. "You treated me with respect. No demands. No expectations." She looked at him with grateful eyes. "That moment changed everything for me." Daniel smiled gently. "Sometimes people just need a safe place to breathe," he said. Clara nodded. "And you gave me that place." For a few seconds, they both stood quietly, watching the last light of the sunset. Then Daniel spoke again. "You know," he said, "Red Hollow could use someone like you." Clara tilted her head. "Someone who remembers what kindness feels like." Clara smiled warmly. "Then I think I'm exactly where I belong." The stars slowly appeared above the desert sky. The small town of Red Hollow grew quiet as night settled across the land. Inside the stable, the horses rested peacefully, and for the first time in many years, Clara Whitmore felt something she had almost forgotten. She felt home, all because one quiet cowboy had answered a simple question with kindness. "Well," Daniel said, "tighten the last nail. Horses teach patience." Clara looked across the open land. For a moment, she thought about the long journey that had brought her to this town. There had been many days of uncertainty and worry, but now things felt different, safer. "Daniel," she said quietly. He looked up. "Yes." "I've been thinking," Clara said. "I don't want to leave Red Hollow." Daniel rested his hammer on the fence. "You don't have to," he replied. Clara looked relieved. "I want to stay," she continued. "I want to work here and build a life here if that's possible." Daniel nodded slowly. "I think that would make a lot of people happy," he said. Clara smiled. Later that evening, the sky above Red Hollow turned soft pink and orange as the sun began to set. Clara stood outside the stable, watching the light fade across the desert. Daniel walked over and leaned against the wooden fence beside her. The town looked peaceful. After a moment, Clara spoke again. "Do you remember the first night I came here?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Yes." Clara took a deep breath. "That night, when I asked you that question," she said softly, Daniel understood what she meant. Clara looked at the horizon. "I asked because I thought your kindness would come at a price," she said honestly. Daniel stayed quiet. "But your answer surprised me," Clara continued. "You treated me with respect. No demands. No expectations." She looked at him with grateful eyes. "That moment changed everything for me." Daniel smiled gently. "Sometimes people just need a safe place to breathe," he said. Clara nodded. "And you gave me that place." For a few seconds, they both stood quietly, watching the last light of the sunset. Then Daniel spoke again. "You know," he said, "Red Hollow could use someone like you." Clara tilted her head. "Someone who remembers what kindness feels like." Clara smiled warmly. "Then I think I'm exactly where I belong." The stars slowly appeared above the desert sky. The small town of Red Hollow grew quiet as night settled across the land. Inside the stable, the horses rested peacefully, and for the first time in many years, Clara Whitmore felt something she had almost forgotten. She felt home, all because one quiet cowboy had answered a simple question with kindness.